The rain pelted the cracked asphalt like tiny bullets, creating a symphony of splashes that matched the frantic rhythm of my heart. My shoes, cheap knockoffs I'd bought on clearance last winter, were soaked through, the icy water seeping between my toes with every hurried step. I was already 15 minutes late for my shift at Bellissimo, the upscale Italian restaurant where I'd managed to hold a waitressing job for the past 8 months, the longest I'd kept any job since Mom died. "Please, please, please," I whispered, my breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. Don't let Marcus be there yet. Marcus, the floor manager, had warned me twice this month about tardiness. "One more strike, Ellie, and you're out," he'd said yesterday, his coffee-stained teeth bared in what I supposed was his attempt at a threatening smile. I needed this job. The rent on my shoebox apartment was due in 3 days, and I was still short $100. I cut through the alley behind 5th Street, a shortcut I usually avoided, especially in the early morning darkness. The narrow passage stank of garbage and urine, but it would save me precious minutes. Clutching my purse tightly against my side, I quickened my pace, my eyes fixed on the strip of gray sky visible between the looming buildings. That's when I heard it. A low groan, almost lost beneath the patter of rain and distant traffic. I froze, scanning the shadows. There, slumped against the brick wall, was the silhouette of a man. My first instinct was to run. In this city, in this alley, a stranger meant danger, but then he shifted, and the weak light caught his face. Blood streaked from his temple, mingling with rain and trailing down the sharp angle of his jaw. Even in pain, there was something striking about him. Something that made my breath catch. His suit, despite being soaked and smeared with dirt, was clearly expensive, custom-tailored. The kind worn by men who drove cars worth more than my entire life's earnings. "Are you okay?" I called, keeping my distance. Stupid question. He obviously wasn't. His eyes fluttered open, dark, almost black in the dim light, and fixed on me with startling intensity. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I felt pinned by his gaze, like a butterfly to a collection board. "I'm fine," he said finally, his voice a low rumble that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "Just need a minute." He tried to stand but faltered, one hand pressed to his side. I hesitated. Every second I spent here was another second closer to unemployment. But I couldn't just leave him bleeding in an alley. "Let me help," I said, moving closer despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Do you need a hospital?" "No." The word came out sharp, commanding. No hospitals. Of course. In this neighborhood, that could mean one of two things. No insurance or no desire to explain injuries to the police. Given his suit and the expensive watch glinting on his wrist, I suspected the latter. "At least let me help you somewhere dry," I offered, glancing at my watch. 20 minutes late now. Marcus was definitely going to fire me. When I looked back at the stranger, something in his expression had changed. The pain was still there, tightening the corners of his mouth, but there was curiosity too. "Why would you help me?" he asked, suspicion evident in the slight narrowing of his eyes. "You don't know me." I shrugged, rainwater dripping from my soaked ponytail. Maybe I'm just stupid, or maybe I'd hoped someone would do the same for me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Both admirable and naive. With visible effort, he pushed himself upright, towering over me by at least a foot. I hadn't realized how tall he was, how broad his shoulders were beneath a sodden jacket. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," I suggested, keeping a careful distance. "You could call someone." He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then, without warning, he staggered forward. Instinctively, I moved to support him, finding myself suddenly crushed against the solid wall of his chest, his arm heavy across my shoulders. The scent of him hit me. Expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of blood and something uniquely male. Heat radiated from his body despite his wet clothes, and I was abruptly, uncomfortably aware of how long it had been since I'd been this close to a man. "The coffee shop," he agreed, his breath warm against my ear. Together we limped out of the alley, his weight nearly buckling my knees. Once on the main street, I noticed a sleek black SUV parked across the road, its engine running. The stranger stiffened beside me. "Change of plans," he muttered, straightening despite his obvious pain. He withdrew a phone from his pocket. Not the latest iPhone like I expected, but a simple flip phone that seemed at odds with his expensive attire. He dialed a number without looking, his eyes scanning the street with newfound alertness. South entrance. Now. That was all he said before snapping the phone shut. Within seconds, the SUV pulled up beside us. The tinted window rolled down to reveal a hard-faced man with a neck thick as a tree trunk. "Boss," the man acknowledged, his eyes flicking to me with open suspicion. "Who's this?" "Boss." I tried to step away, suddenly uneasy, but the stranger's arm tightened around my shoulders. "My good Samaritan," he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "She's coming with us." "What?" "No, I'm not," I began, but my protest died as the back door swung open and I was smoothly maneuvered inside, the stranger sliding in beside me. "I have work," I said desperately as the SUV pulled away from the curb. "I'm already late. They'll fire me." "Where?" he asked, pressing a handkerchief. Actual silk, I noted hysterically, to his temple. "Bellissimo, on Parkway Avenue. But I can't just—" "Bellissimo," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made me pause. He leaned forward slightly. "Paolo, call Antonio at Bellissimo. Tell him Elena." He glanced at me questioningly. "Ellie," I supplied automatically. "Ellie Carter. Tell him Elena Carter is taking a personal day. Family emergency. Her position is to remain open." The driver, Paolo, nodded once, already pulling out his own phone. "How do you—" I began, but the stranger cut me off with a raised hand. "You helped me. I'm returning the favor." "By kidnapping me?" A smile spread across his face then, dangerous and oddly charming all at once. It transformed him, softening the harsh angles of his face and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Is it kidnapping if I'm taking you to have your job saved?" he countered. "It is if I don't have a choice." I shot back, some of my fear giving way to indignation. He seemed to consider this, tilting his head slightly. "A fair point. Paolo, pull over if Ms. Carter wishes to leave." The SUV immediately slowed, pulling to the curb. I stared at the door handle, then back at the stranger. Blood still seeped from the cut on his temple, and now that we were in better light, I could see the bruising beginning to form along his jaw. Despite his commanding presence, he was injured, perhaps worse than he was letting on. "Who are you?" I asked instead of reaching for the door. "Someone who doesn't like owing debts," he replied simply. "Even small ones." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." After a pause, he added, "Daniel Russo." The name meant nothing to me, but he said it like it should, like it was a key I was supposed to recognize. "And what happened to you, Daniel Russo?" His eyes, dark brown I could now see, with flecks of amber near the pupils, hardened slightly. "A disagreement with an associate." "A disagreement that left you bleeding in an alley?" Some disagreements are more vigorous than others. There was a dangerous edge to his voice now, a subtle warning I'd be wise to heed. I glanced out the window, recognizing the affluent downtown neighborhood we were entering. The sleek glass and steel buildings reflected the gray morning light, a world away from my part of town. "Where are we going?" I asked, suddenly aware of how out of place I must look in my cheap waitress uniform, soaking wet, and probably smelling of alley garbage. "My personal physician," Daniel answered, watching me with that same puzzling intensity. "After which, I'll have you taken wherever you wish to go." "I can't afford a doctor," I said automatically. The dimple appeared again. "Consider it included in my debt repayment." The SUV turned into an underground parking garage beneath one of the most exclusive condominium buildings in the city. I'd read about it in a magazine once. Apartments starting at $3 million, amenities including a private spa and rooftop helipad. As we pulled into a reserved space, I noticed 2 more black SUVs already parked nearby. Men in suits stood beside them, alert and watchful. They straightened as our vehicle stopped, hands moving subtly toward the bulges beneath their jackets. My mouth went dry. "You're not just some businessman, are you?" Daniel's gaze remained fixed on mine. Would it matter if I wasn't? Before I could answer, Paolo opened his door, and another suit-clad man opened mine. As I stepped out, I felt dizzy with the sudden realization of what kind of man could command such attention, such security. I couldn't finish the sentence. I'm a man who values loyalty and repays his debts, Daniel said simply, emerging from the SUV with far more grace than someone with his injuries should possess. Right now, that's all you need to know. He gestured toward a private elevator, its doors already held open by yet another stone-faced man in a suit. Shall we? I hesitated, every instinct screaming that I was making a terrible mistake. I should run now, while I still could. But where would I go? Back to a job that was probably already lost? To an apartment I couldn't afford? Daniel must have sensed my internal struggle. His expression softened fractionally. You have my word that no harm will come to you, Ellie Carter. You're under my protection now. The way he said it, like a royal decree, absolute and unquestionable, sent a shiver through me that wasn't entirely fear. Just until you see your doctor, I clarified, stepping reluctantly toward the elevator. Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes this time. Of course. But as the elevator doors closed behind us, enclosing me in the small space with him and two of his men, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just crossed some invisible threshold, that the simple act of helping an injured man in an alley had set something in motion that I couldn't stop if I tried. And the way Daniel Russo looked at me, with that mixture of curiosity and something darker, more possessive, suggested he had no intention of letting me try. The elevator ascended with silent efficiency, the only sound the faint hum of machinery and my own uneven breathing. I was acutely aware of Daniel's presence beside me, the heat radiating from his body, the subtle scent of his cologne cutting through the metallic tang of blood. His men stood like statues, eyes forward, hands clasped before them. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. I shifted my weight from one soggy foot to the other, painfully conscious of my bedraggled appearance. My uniform, a black pencil skirt and white button-up blouse, clung to me uncomfortably, the fabric gone nearly transparent with rain. I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling exposed. Cold? Daniel asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Before I could respond, he shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders in one fluid motion. Despite being damp from the rain, it retained his warmth and that distinctive scent. Sandalwood and something darker, something exclusively his. Thank you, I murmured, surprised by the gesture. The jacket engulfed me, its sleeves hanging well past my fingertips. Daniel's gaze lingered on me, something possessive flickering in his dark eyes. It suits you. The elevator chimed softly as we reached the penthouse level. The doors slid open to reveal an expansive foyer with marble floors and a crystal chandelier that scattered prismatic light across cream-colored walls. A far cry from my cramped studio apartment with its peeling paint and secondhand furniture. This way, Daniel directed, placing his hand at the small of my back to guide me. His touch, even through the layers of his jacket and my wet blouse, sent an involuntary tremor up my spine. We moved through the foyer into a vast living area dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Rain streaked the glass, turning the world beyond into an impressionistic painting of grays and muted colors. Vittorio will be here shortly, one of the men announced before disappearing down a hallway. Daniel nodded, then turned to me. Vittorio is discreet, he explained, as if reading my thoughts, and exceptionally skilled. Unlike the doctors at regular hospitals, I couldn't help asking, a hint of defiance in my voice. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Precisely. He moved to a built-in bar of polished walnut and crystal. Drink? I shook my head. It's not even 9 a.m. A fair point. He selected a crystal tumbler anyway, pouring himself 2 fingers of amber liquid, though in my experience, conventional schedules are luxuries for those with conventional lives. I watched as he knocked back the drink in one smooth motion, barely wincing as the alcohol no doubt stung his split lip. There was something mesmerizing about his movements, an economy of motion, a controlled power that seemed both casual and calculated. Is your life very unconventional, Mr. Russo? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He set the glass down, his eyes finding mine. Daniel, he corrected. And yes, you could say that. Before I could press further, a door opened, and a distinguished older man entered carrying a leather medical bag. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his suit as expensive-looking as Daniel's, though considerably drier. "Daniel," the man greeted, his accent distinctly Italian. "I see you've been making friends again." Daniel's expression hardened. "Vittorio." The doctor's eyes shifted to me, one eyebrow arching in surprise. "And who might this be?" "Elena Carter," Daniel answered before I could speak. "She provided assistance when it was needed. She's wet and cold. Have Rosa find her something dry to wear while you attend to me." It wasn't a request. Vittorio nodded once, then pressed a button on a panel in the wall. Within moments, a middle-aged woman in simple black attire appeared. "Take Ms. Carter to the guest suite," Vittorio instructed her. "Find her suitable clothing and ensure she's comfortable." Rosa, a slight woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, gestured for me to follow. I hesitated, looking back at Daniel, suddenly reluctant to leave him despite the strangeness of our situation. "Go," he said, his tone softer than before. "Get dry. I'll be here when you return." It sounded like a promise, or a warning. I wasn't sure which. Rosa led me down a corridor lined with what appeared to be original artwork. Oils and watercolors in gilded frames that probably cost more than my entire education. The guest suite turned out to be larger than my entire apartment, with a king-sized bed draped in cream silk, and a bathroom bigger than my kitchen. "Shower is through there," Rosa indicated with a gentle smile. "I'll find you something to wear and leave it on the bed. Take your time, querida." She disappeared before I could thank her. Left alone, I stood dripping on the plush carpet, Daniel's jacket still draped around my shoulders like a shield. Slowly, reluctantly, I slipped it off, hanging it carefully on a nearby chair. The bathroom was a marvel of marble and glass, with a rainfall shower large enough for 3 people. I stripped off my wet clothes, setting them in a soggy pile on the tile floor, and stepped under the hot spray with a sigh that was almost a sob. The water pounded against my tense muscles, washing away the alley grime and the cold that had seeped into my bones. As steam filled the glass enclosure, I found myself replaying the morning's events like a surreal dream. Had I really found a bleeding man in an alley? Had I really been whisked away in a luxury SUV to a penthouse apartment with armed guards? And Daniel Russo. Who was he really? The way his men deferred to him, the immediate response to his commands, the obvious wealth. All pointed to someone powerful. Someone dangerous. Mafia, whispered a voice in my head. The thought should have terrified me more than it did. I used the provided toiletries. All expensive brands I recognized from magazine advertisements but had never been able to afford, and wrapped myself in a plush towel. When I emerged from the bathroom, I found a set of clothes laid out on the bed. Designer jeans that looked close to my size, a soft cashmere sweater in deep blue, and, mortifyingly, brand new underwear with the tag still attached. I dressed quickly, surprised by how well everything fit. The jeans hugged my curves without being too tight, and the sweater felt like being wrapped in a cloud. Even the underwear, simple but clearly expensive, fit perfectly. I ran my fingers through my damp hair, wishing for a brush, and found one on the dresser, as if summoned by my thoughts. A light tap on the door startled me. "Miss Carter," Rosa called. "Are you decent?" "Yes," I answered, setting the brush down. She entered with a tray of tea and small sandwiches. "You must be hungry," she said, placing the tray on a small table by the window. "Please eat something." My stomach growled on cue. I hadn't had breakfast, too rushed to make my shift on time. "Thank you," I said, selecting a sandwich. It was cucumber and cream cheese on thin white bread, crusts removed. The kind of dainty fare served at high teas I'd only read about. "Mr. Russo asks if you're feeling better," Rosa said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the bedspread. I swallowed a bite of sandwich. "Yes, much. Thank you for the clothes." Rosa smiled. "Mr. Russo keeps a selection for guests." Something in the way she hesitated made me wonder exactly what kind of guests usually warranted emergency wardrobes. "Is he okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "The doctor is still with him," she replied diplomatically. "He'll see you when he's ready." When he's ready. Not when I'm ready to leave, which would have been the natural conclusion to this strange encounter. I felt a flutter of unease. "Rosa," I began carefully, "who exactly is Mr. Russo?" She regarded me with surprise. "You don't know?" I shook my head. A strange expression crossed her face. Part pity, part something else I couldn't quite identify. "He is a man of business, very successful, very respected." The way she said respected made it clear she meant feared. "And what kind of business is he in?" I pressed. Rosa's expression closed off. "It's not my place to discuss Mr. Russo's affairs. If you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to." She moved to the door, then paused. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Russo doesn't often bring people here, especially not women he's just met." Her eyes, suddenly serious, held mine. "Whatever happens, remember that his world operates by different rules than the one you know." With that cryptic warning, she left, closing the door softly behind her. I sat on the edge of the bed, appetite suddenly diminished. Rosa's words echoed in my mind, reinforcing my suspicions about exactly what kind of man Daniel Russo was. I should leave. Now, before things got more complicated. I could call a cab, be back in my own neighborhood within 30 minutes. Back to my regular life of double shifts and counting pennies. But curiosity, that dangerous, persistent emotion, kept me rooted in place. That, and the memory of Daniel's eyes on me, dark and intent, like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. Another tap at the door interrupted my thoughts. Without waiting for a response, the door swung open to reveal Daniel himself. He'd changed into a fresh suit, charcoal gray, impeccably tailored to his broad shoulders and narrow waist. A pristine white shirt contrasted with his olive complexion, and a tie the color of burgundy wine completed the ensemble. The cut on his temple had been butterfly-stitched, and a dark bruise was forming along his jaw. But otherwise, he looked remarkably composed for a man who'd been slumped bleeding in an alley just hours ago. "The clothes fit," he observed, his gaze traveling over me in a way that made heat rise to my cheeks. "Yes," I said, standing. "Thank you. For everything. But I should really go now." Daniel stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. The action, casual as it was, made the space feel suddenly smaller, more intimate. "You haven't finished your tea," he noted, nodding toward the tray. "I'm not really thirsty." "Sit," he said, gesturing to the armchair by the window. "Please," he added, almost as an afterthought. Something told me Daniel Russo wasn't accustomed to saying please very often. I perched on the edge of the chair, watching as he took the seat opposite me, movements fluid despite his injuries. "Vittorio says I have 2 cracked ribs and a mild concussion," he informed me, as if discussing the weather. "Nothing that won't heal." "That's good," I said awkwardly. "Thanks to your intervention." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped before him. I noticed his knuckles were split and bruised. He'd clearly given as good as he got in whatever disagreement had left him in that alley. "I didn't do much," I demurred. "You stopped," he countered. "Most wouldn't have. Especially not for a stranger in that particular alley." I shrugged. "I guess I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, his gaze intensifying. "You're not." The silence stretched between us, charged with something I couldn't quite name. "Mr. Russo. Daniel." He corrected again. "Daniel," I conceded. "I appreciate your hospitality, but I really should go. I need to check if I still have a job, for one thing." "Your job at Bellissimo is secure," he said with absolute confidence. "How can you be so sure?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because I own it." I blinked, processing this information. "You own Bellissimo?" "Among other establishments, yes." My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't seen before. The way the staff sometimes snapped to attention without apparent cause. The mysterious Mr. R, whose table was always kept available. The private dining room that was off limits to regular staff. "I've worked there for 8 months, I said slowly. "I've never seen you there. I rarely visit my businesses in person," he explained. "It's complicated." "Because you're hiding from rivals? From the police?" The questions burned on my tongue, but I held them back. Nevertheless, I said, standing. I should go. Thank you for your kindness, but have dinner with me, Daniel interrupted, rising to his feet in one smooth motion. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry? Dinner, he repeated. Tonight. Here. It wasn't quite a question, but neither was it a command. Why? The word slipped out before I could stop it. Daniel stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises, smell the faint mint of his breath. Because you intrigue me, Elena Carter, he said softly, and I find that a rare occurrence these days. My heart hammered against my ribs. Warning bells clanged in my head. This man was dangerous. Everything about him screamed it, from his carefully controlled movements to the armed men who surrounded him. Whatever business he was in, it wasn't anything legal, and yet... Just dinner? I asked cautiously. The dimple appeared in his right cheek. Just dinner, he confirmed. Though I can't promise the conversation won't be... enlightening. I should say no. I should walk away and never look back. But the thought of returning to my dreary apartment, to my struggle of a life, suddenly seemed unbearably bleak compared to the mystery this man represented. Okay, I heard myself say. Dinner. Daniel's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. Excellent. Paolo will collect you at 7. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of damp hair from my cheek. The touch, feather-light and brief, sent electricity skating across my skin. Until tonight, Elena, he murmured, his accent caressing my name in a way that made it sound exotic, precious. As he turned to leave, I found my voice again. Daniel? He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. What exactly did I just agree to? For a moment, something dark and predatory flashed in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Just dinner, cara mia, he repeated. For now. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like the tumbler of a lock falling into place. I stood frozen, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. And why. Despite every rational thought screaming caution, I was already counting the hours until 7 o'clock. Paolo arrived precisely at 7, his imposing figure filling my apartment doorway. I'd spent the afternoon in a daze, alternating between anticipation and anxiety about my dinner with Daniel. After returning home in one of Daniel's sleek town cars, I'd found a package waiting at my door. A dress box tied with a simple black ribbon. Inside was an emerald green dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, along with matching shoes and a note in elegant script. For tonight. D. I debated whether to wear it, the implied presumption both irritating and flattering. In the end, curiosity won out over pride. The dress fit perfectly, as if tailored specifically for my body, the silk fabric cool against my skin as Paolo escorted me back to the same black SUV from this morning. The city lights blurred outside the tinted windows. We're not going to the penthouse? I asked, when I noticed we were heading in a different direction. Mr. Russo has other arrangements for tonight, Paolo replied, his first words since greeting me at my door. We pulled up to a renovated warehouse on the riverfront, an area that had once been industrial, but was now home to luxury lofts and exclusive clubs. 2 men in suits materialized as the SUV stopped, one opening my door, while the other scanned the surroundings with practiced vigilance. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed into a private event space. Exposed brick walls contrasted with crystal chandeliers, and the polished concrete floor reflected their soft glow. A single table for 2 stood in the center of the otherwise empty room, set with fine china and silver, a centerpiece of white roses and flickering candles between the place settings. And there was Daniel, standing beside the table. He'd exchanged his business suit for a more casual ensemble, dark trousers and a charcoal cashmere sweater that clung to his broad shoulders. The bruise along his jaw had darkened, giving him a dangerous edge that the elegant surroundings couldn't quite soften. His eyes darkened as they traveled over me, lingering on the way the dress hugged my curves. Elena, he said, my name like velvet on his tongue. You look breathtaking. The dress helped, I replied, suddenly self-conscious. Thank you for it, though you shouldn't have. I wanted to, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps in his world it did. He pulled out my chair, his hand brushing my bare shoulder as I sat. That brief contact sent a ripple of awareness through me, and I suppressed a shiver. Wine? He offered, nodding to a server I hadn't noticed standing discreetly in the corner. Just a little, I said. I have the early shift tomorrow. If I still had a job, that was. As if reading my thoughts, Daniel smiled. Your schedule has been adjusted. You're not expected until the dinner service. I set down the wine glass the server had just filled. You changed my work schedule? I own the restaurant, remember? His tone was light, but there was something beneath it, a reminder of his power, perhaps. That doesn't give you the right to rearrange my life, I countered, meeting his gaze directly. Rather than being offended, Daniel looked pleased by my defiance. You're right, of course, he conceded. Consider it a suggestion. One that allows us to enjoy dinner without rushing. The server appeared with the first course. Seared scallops on a bed of something delicate and green. It looked like the kind of food I served at Bellissimo but rarely got to taste myself. So, I began, gathering my courage. Are you going to tell me what you really do, Daniel? He took a sip of wine, considering me over the rim of his glass. I told you. I'm a businessman. What kind of business involves getting beaten up in alleys and traveling with an armed entourage? A complicated one. His smile didn't reach his eyes. One that occasionally involves disagreements with competitors. You mean one that's not entirely legal? I pressed, spearing a scallop with my fork. Daniel set his glass down carefully. The line between legal and illegal is often blurry in my experience. But to answer your question, yes, some of my enterprises exist in what you might call a gray area. You're in the mob, I said flatly. It wasn't a question. For a long moment, he just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish despite the bruises. That's a rather outdated term, he said finally. But if it helps you understand, then yes. I have connections to certain organizations that operate outside conventional legal frameworks. My heart should have been racing with fear. Instead, I felt oddly calm, as if I'd finally identified the predator that had been stalking through the shadows. And the men who attacked you? His expression hardened. Representatives of a rival who thought he could expand into my territory without consequences. Did he learn otherwise? I asked, surprised by my own boldness. Daniel's smile was cold. He will. The thread in those two simple words hung in the air between us. I should have been terrified, should have made an excuse and fled. Instead, I took another bite of scallop, savoring the delicate flavor. Why me? I asked finally. Why am I here? Having dinner with you? Wearing this dress? I gestured at the emerald silk. What could possibly interest you about a waitress from the wrong side of town? Daniel studied me, his dark eyes intent. You stopped to help a stranger in an alley, he said simply. Do you know how rare that is in this city? In this world? Basic human decency isn't that rare, I countered. It is in my experience. Something flashed across his face. Something almost vulnerable before the mask of control slipped back into place. Besides, you intrigue me. Because I didn't recognize you, I guessed. He inclined his head slightly, partially. Most people in this city, at least in certain circles, know who I am. Know to either fear me or try to use me. You did neither. I still don't fear you, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Daniel leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. Perhaps you should. The server chose that moment to clear our plates and bring the main course. Tender medallions of beef with a red wine reduction, and roasted vegetables arranged like miniature works of art. Tell me about yourself, Elena, Daniel said, the dangerous moment passing as quickly as it had come. How did you end up at Bellissimo? I hesitated, then decided there was little risk in sharing my unremarkable story. My mom got sick my sophomore year of college. Cancer. I dropped out to take care of her. After she died, there were medical bills, no degree. Waitressing was one of the few jobs I could get that paid enough to keep a roof over my head. No other family? His question was gentle. I shook my head. Dad left when I was 4. No siblings. And boyfriends? The question was casual, but his eyes had sharpened. None at the moment, I admitted. Hard to maintain a relationship when you're working double shifts 6 days a week. Something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction flickered across his face. Their loss, he murmured. The conversation drifted to safer topics. Books we'd read, films we'd seen. Daniel was surprisingly well-versed in literature, quoting Dante and Hemingway with equal ease. When he spoke about things he was passionate about, the carefully controlled facade slipped, revealing glimpses of a different man, one who might have been a professor or philosopher in another life. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate tiramisu that melted on my tongue, I'd almost forgotten the circumstances of our meeting. Almost. You never answered my question, I said as I set down my spoon. What is this, really? Why am I here? Daniel regarded me thoughtfully. Would you believe me if I said I simply enjoy your company? No, I replied honestly. He smiled, that dimple appearing briefly. Smart girl. He leaned back in his chair, wineglass cradled in one large hand. The truth is, I don't entirely know myself. You're unexpected, Elena. In my world, unexpected things are usually threats. And am I? A threat? His gaze traveled over my face, lingering on my lips. Undoubtedly, he murmured. Though not in the way you mean. Heat bloomed in my cheeks. Before I could respond, one of his men approached, bending to whisper something in Daniel's ear. His expression darkened instantly, all traces of warmth vanishing. Excuse me, he said, standing abruptly. Business that requires my attention. Paolo will see you home. Daniel, I began, oddly disappointed. He paused, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then, in a fluid motion, he leaned down and pressed his lips to mine, a brief, firm kiss that stole my breath and scattered my thoughts. Until next time, cara mia, he murmured against my lips. Then he was gone, his men falling into step behind him as they exited through a side door. Paolo materialized at my elbow. Ms. Carter? Whenever you're ready. I touched my fingers to my lips, still feeling the imprint of Daniel's kiss. I'm ready, I said, though I wasn't sure what exactly I was ready for. The ride back to my apartment passed in silence, my mind replaying every moment of the evening, analyzing every word, every look. I'd just had dinner with a man who was, by his own admission, involved in organized crime. A man who commanded armed guards and owned businesses I could never afford to patronize. A man who had kissed me as if he had every right to do so, and I had let him. More than that, I had enjoyed it. What did that say about me? Paolo opened my apartment door, checking inside before allowing me to enter. Mr. Russo wanted me to inform you that your new work schedule has been communicated to the restaurant management, he said formally. You're expected tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you, I replied automatically. Paolo hesitated, then added, Ms. Carter, Mr. Russo doesn't do this. Do what? Personal dinners. Gifts. His eyes flicked to my dress. Be careful. Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I slipped out of the emerald dress, hanging it carefully in my closet beside my thrift store finds and discount retail clothing. It looked as out of place there as I had felt at dinner with Daniel. Beautiful, expensive, and completely foreign to my normal life. As I crawled into bed, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Sleep well, Elena. Dream of me. I stared at the screen, a mixture of emotions churning inside me. Fear, excitement, confusion, and beneath it all, a dangerous anticipation of what might come next. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of contradictions. By day, I was still Ellie Carter, waitress at Bellissimo, serving pasta and wine to wealthy patrons. But my nights now belonged to Daniel. It started with small gestures, flowers delivered to my apartment, books we'd discussed appearing on my doorstep, a cashmere scarf left in a box with a simple note, for the cold mornings, D. Then came the invitations. Dinner at exclusive restaurants where we were always seated at the best table. A private viewing of a new exhibition at the Modern Art Museum after hours. A concert where we watched from a VIP box, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. With each encounter, I learned more about Daniel Russo. He was 34, the son of Italian immigrants who had built their fortune through various enterprises. His euphemism, not mine. He had a degree in business from an Ivy League university. He spoke 3 languages fluently. He preferred red wine to white, classical music to jazz, and could recite poetry from memory when sufficiently inspired. What I didn't learn was equally telling. He never discussed the specifics of his business. Never introduced me to anyone beyond his immediate security detail. Never took me to his home again after that first morning, instead meeting me at neutral locations or sending Paolo to bring me to private venues like the warehouse. And he never, ever let me see him interact with anyone outside his inner circle. Why all the secrecy? I asked one evening, as we sat on the rooftop terrace of a restaurant that had been cleared of other patrons for our dinner. Are you ashamed to be seen with me? Daniel's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Never, he said firmly, taking my hand across the table. His thumb traced circles on my palm, sending shivers up my arm. I'm protecting you. From what? His expression darkened. From my world. From the attention being associated with me would bring. I withdrew my hand. I'm not a child, Daniel. I can make my own decisions about risks. Not these risks, he said, his voice dropping to a register that sent a shiver down my spine. Not when they involve me. That was the pattern of our whatever this was. Not quite a relationship, but more than casual dating. He pursued me with a single-minded intensity that was both flattering and unnerving. When we were together, his focus never wavered from me, as if I were the only person in his universe. He remembered every detail I shared, anticipated my needs before I voiced them, and slowly, methodically, broke down the walls I'd built around myself. And yet, he maintained his own walls with unwavering discipline. He revealed himself in carefully measured doses, always remaining partly in shadow. Most unsettling was the possessiveness that grew with each encounter, the way his jaw tightened when male customers at Bellissimo lingered too long at my tables, the pointed questions about my coworkers, my neighbors, any man who might have access to me when he didn't, the way he'd press his lips to my neck, my wrist, my collarbone, not quite love bites, but markings nonetheless. You're mine now, he whispered one night, as his car dropped me at my apartment. You understand that, don't you? I should have been offended. Should have reminded him that people don't belong to other people. Instead, I felt a treacherous thrill at his words, at the heat in his eyes when he claimed me. What was happening to me? Work at Bellissimo changed too. I was mysteriously assigned the best sections, my shifts arranged to accommodate my evenings with Daniel. The manager who had threatened to fire me now treated me with careful deference. Co-workers who had barely noticed me before now watched me with curious, sometimes wary eyes. Is it true? Mia, another waitress, whispered during a lull in service. Are you really with him? With who? I asked, though I knew exactly who she meant. Russo, she hissed, glancing around nervously. Everyone's talking about it. How you disappeared that rainy morning and came back with a new schedule and the best tables. I busied myself folding napkins. I don't know what you're talking about. Mia grabbed my wrist, her eyes wide. Be careful, Ellie. I had a cousin who got involved with one of those guys. When she tried to leave, she drew a finger across her throat. Daniel isn't like that, I said automatically, pulling away from her. They're all like that, she insisted. It's all ownership and control. You're just property to them. Her words echoed in my mind that evening as I prepared for yet another date with Daniel. This time, he'd asked me to dress for dancing, a cryptic instruction that had me settling on a simple black dress that moved with me, paired with the emerald earrings he'd sent last week. Paolo picked me up as usual, but instead of a restaurant or private venue, we drove to a part of the city I didn't recognize. The buildings grew older, more ornate, with names in Italian on weathered storefronts. Where are we? I asked as Paolo helped me from the car. The old neighborhood, he replied. Where it all began. He led me to an unassuming door sandwiched between a bakery and a tailor shop. A discreet brass plaque read simply, Club Vesuvio, in elegant script. The man at the door nodded respectfully to Paolo, his eyes widening slightly when he saw me. Inside, the club was like stepping back in time. Red velvet banquettes lined the walls. A small stage held a 5-piece band playing traditional Italian music. The dance floor was crowded with couples, many of them older, moving with the practiced ease of people who had danced together for decades, and there was Daniel, waiting at a corner table, rising as he saw me approach. Unlike our other encounters, he wasn't alone. 3 older men sat with him, their conversation halting as I drew near. "Elena." Daniel greeted me, pressing a kiss to my cheek. His hand settled possessively at the small of my back. "You look stunning." The older men regarded me with open curiosity. One, with silver hair and a face lined by years of hard living, seemed particularly interested, his shrewd eyes moving between Daniel and me with knowing assessment. "Gentlemen," Daniel said, "may I present Elena Carter." No explanation of who they were. No context for this unprecedented introduction to people from his world. "So this is the girl," said the silver-haired man, his accent thicker than Daniel's. "The one who found you in the alley." Daniel's hand tightened slightly against my back. "Yes, Uncle. This is her. Uncle." I glanced at the man with new interest. There was a family resemblance now that I looked, something in the set of the eyes, the proud angle of the jaw. "Salvatore Russo," the man introduced himself, extending a hand adorned with gold rings. "Daniel's uncle. These are my associates, Mr. Vescovi and Mr. Esposito." I shook their hands, noting the assessing looks they gave me. I felt like livestock being inspected at auction. "A pleasure," I managed, falling back on the formal politeness I used with Bellissimo's wealthier patrons. "She has spirit," Salvatore remarked to Daniel, as if I weren't there. "Pretty, too. Not your usual type." I bristled at being discussed like an object, but before I could respond, Daniel smoothly interjected, "Uncle, the band is playing our song. May I steal Elena for a dance?" Without waiting for a response, he guided me to the dance floor, one hand at my waist, the other clasping mine. He led with the confidence of someone who had learned ballroom dancing from an early age, guiding me through steps I barely knew. "You're angry," he observed, pulling me closer than the dance strictly required. "I don't appreciate being inspected like a prize mare," I said, keeping my voice low. "Who were those men? Why am I suddenly allowed to meet people from your world?" Daniel's expression was unreadable. "My uncle wanted to meet you. He's curious about the woman who's been occupying so much of my time." "And do you always do what your uncle wants?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "It's complicated, Elena. Everything with you is complicated," I countered, frustration bubbling up. 3 weeks of clandestine meetings, and suddenly I'm being presented to your family? What changed? Daniel spun me in a graceful turn before answering. "I did," he said finally. "My intentions changed." "Intentions?" I repeated, a flutter of something between anticipation and dread stirring in my stomach. His dark eyes locked with mine. "I want more than stolen evenings, Elena. I want you in my life, properly." "What does that even mean in your world, Daniel?" He pulled me closer, his lips brushing my ear. "It means protection, respect. No one would dare touch what belongs to me." There it was again, that possessive language that should have repelled me, but instead sent heat pooling low in my abdomen. "And what if I don't want to belong to anyone?" I challenged, even as my body betrayed me by melting against his. Daniel's smile held a predatory edge. "We both know that's not true." His hand slid lower on my back, proprietary and intimate. "You've been mine since that morning in the alley. You just haven't fully accepted it yet." The music ended, but Daniel didn't release me. Instead, he led me through a door at the back of the club and up a narrow staircase. We emerged onto a small rooftop terrace overlooking the city, strings of lights casting a warm glow over worn brick and potted lemon trees. "What is this place?" I asked, momentarily distracted by the unexpected beauty. My grandfather's club, Daniel explained, pouring wine from a waiting carafe. He opened it when he first came to America. It's where my father met my mother, where I learned to play cards and dance. It's beautiful, I admitted, accepting the wine. Daniel watched me over the rim of his glass. I've never brought anyone here before, he said quietly. Not someone who matters. The admission hung between us, weighted with implications neither of us was ready to voice. Your uncle didn't seem surprised to see me, I observed. A faint smile touched Daniel's lips. He's been hearing about you for weeks. The whole family has. I nearly choked on my wine. You've been talking about me to your family? Is that so surprising? He moved closer, one hand settling on my hip. You've consumed my thoughts since the moment you stopped in that alley. His intensity should have frightened me. Instead, I found myself swaying toward him, drawn by the magnetic pull he'd exerted since our first meeting. Daniel, I began, not even sure what I wanted to say. He silenced me with a kiss, not the careful, controlled kisses we'd shared before, but something deeper, hungrier. His hand tangled in my hair, tilting my head back as he claimed my mouth with a possessiveness that left no room for doubt about his intentions. I knew I was standing at a precipice. One more step, and I would fall into his world completely. A world of luxury and danger, of protection and possession. A world where men like Daniel Russo ruled through fear and loyalty, where violence lurked beneath the surface of civility. Was I ready for that? Could I accept not just the man, but everything that came with him? As if sensing my internal struggle, Daniel broke the kiss, his forehead resting against mine. Don't think so much, Kara, he murmured. Just feel. And God help me. That's what I did. I let myself feel the heat of his body against mine, the strength in his hands as they held me, the security of being wanted, truly wanted, by someone who had the power to keep the world's hardships at bay. For tonight, at least, I would allow myself this. Tomorrow, I would face the reality of what loving Daniel Russo might mean. The breaking point came 3 days after meeting Daniel's family. I was working the dinner shift at Bellissimo, balancing a tray of appetizers, when I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Marco, the maitre d', was arguing with someone, unusual, given his typical obsequious demeanor with guests. I delivered my appetizers and was heading back to the kitchen when a hand clamped around my upper arm. I turned to find myself face to face with a man I'd never seen before, tall, expensively dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "Elena Carter?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. I tried to pull away. "I'm working. If you'd like a table, I'd like a word," he interrupted, his grip tightening. "About your boyfriend." My blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's smile widened. "Don't play dumb, sweetheart. Everyone knows you're Russo's new pet." He leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. "Tell him Vitale sends regards. And a reminder that debts must be paid." Before I could respond, Marco appeared with 2 security guards. The man released my arm, straightened his tie, and walked out as if nothing had happened. "Are you all right, Miss Carter?" Marco asked, unusually deferential. "Should I call Mr. Russo?" "No," I said quickly, rubbing my arm where the man's fingers had dug in. "No, I'm fine. Just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't fine. For the first time, the reality of Daniel's world had touched mine directly. It wasn't just luxury cars and private dinners anymore. There were enemies, threats, debts that needed paying. I finished my shift in a daze, jumping at every sound, checking over my shoulder constantly. When I emerged from the restaurant, Paolo was waiting by the now familiar black SUV. "Mr. Russo requests your company," he said, opening the door. I hesitated. "Paolo, someone came into the restaurant tonight." He mentioned a name. "Vitale?" Paolo's normally impassive expression flickered with something like alarm. "Get in the car, Ms. Carter. Now." The urgency in his voice propelled me forward. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, Paolo made a call, speaking rapid Italian that I couldn't follow. I caught Daniel's name and Vitale, the rest lost in colloquialisms. Instead of one of our usual meeting places, Paolo drove directly to Daniel's penthouse. Security was heavier than I remembered. Men stationed at regular intervals throughout the garage and lobby, all watching with alert eyes as we passed. Daniel was waiting when the private elevator opened, pacing the marble foyer like a caged predator. When he saw me, relief flashed across his features, quickly replaced by a cold fury that made me step back instinctively. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crossing to me in 3 long strides. His hands moved over my arms, my face, checking for injuries. "I'm fine," I assured him, wincing slightly when his fingers brushed the spot where the man had grabbed me. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He pushed up my sleeve, revealing the purpling bruise in the shape of fingertips. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "He touched you," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Daniel." "He put his hands on you," Daniel continued as if I hadn't spoken, rage building in each carefully controlled word. He turned to Paolo. "Find him. Bring him to the warehouse, alive." Paolo nodded once and disappeared, leaving me alone with Daniel and his simmering fury. "Who is Vitale?" I asked, rubbing my arms as if suddenly cold. Daniel's expression closed off. "Someone who should know better." He took my hand, leading me into the living room. "You'll stay here tonight. It's not safe at your apartment." "Daniel, wait," I said, pulling my hand free. "I need to understand what's happening. Why did that man come to my workplace? Why did he threaten me?" "He didn't threaten you," Daniel replied, pouring himself a drink. "He threatened me, through you." He knocked back the whiskey in one swallow. "It was a message, a stupid, reckless message from a desperate man. And what happens now?" I asked, suddenly afraid of the answer. Daniel's eyes met mine, cold and determined. "Now I respond to his message, clearly." A chill ran down my spine. I knew intellectually what Daniel was, what his business entailed. But this was the first time I'd seen this side of him directly, the ruthless enforcer who maintained his power through fear, and when necessary, violence. "Are you going to kill him?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Daniel set down his glass. "Do you really want the answer to that question, Elena?" "No," I realized. I didn't. "This is my world," Daniel continued, his voice softening slightly. "It's not pretty. It's not fair. But it's governed by rules, and one of those rules is that you don't touch what belongs to another man." His eyes flashed. "Especially not what belongs to me." There was that word again, belongs. As if I were a possession, a territory to be defended. "I'm not a thing, Daniel," I said quietly. "I don't belong to anyone." He moved toward me, cupping my face in his hands. "You're right," he said, surprising me. "You're not a thing. You're everything." The admission hung between us, raw and unexpected. "I never meant for my life to touch yours like this," he continued, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones. "I thought I could keep you separate, keep you safe." "But you can't," I finished for him. "No," he agreed, his expression grim. "Not anymore. Now there's a target on your back, simply because you matter to me. So what do we do?" Daniel's hand slid from my face to my shoulders, down my arms to clasp my hands. "There are 2 paths forward, cara mia. The first is that we end this now. You go back to your life. I ensure you're financially secure. New apartment, new job, far from here. New identity, if necessary." My heart contracted painfully. "And the second?" His eyes locked with mine, intense and unwavering. "You come into my world completely. You accept my protection, my name. You become untouchable not just because you're mine, but because you're family." It took a moment for his meaning to register. "Are you proposing?" A smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained serious, not very romantically, it seems. He released my hands and crossed to a side table, retrieving a small velvet box. "I've had this for a week. I was waiting for the right moment." He returned, opening the box to reveal a ring. A flawless emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum. It was exquisite, elegant, and completely overwhelming. "Daniel," I breathed, staring at the ring. We've only known each other for a month. And in that month you've become essential to me," he replied. "I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Elena. Never wanted to share my life, my future." He took my hand. "I know it's fast. know it's complicated, but tonight made one thing crystal clear. Half measures won't work anymore. Either you're fully in my world, under my protection, or you need to be far away from it. That's not a choice, I protested. That's an ultimatum. It's reality, he corrected gently. My reality, the one I've been trying to shield you from. I pulled away, pacing to the window. The city stretched below, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there was my tiny apartment, my simple life of double shifts and counting pennies. A life that was small but mine, uncomplicated by violent men and coded threats. But also a life without Daniel, without his intensity, his passion, the way he made me feel seen and treasured for the first time since my mother died. If I say yes, I began slowly, what would it mean? Really? Daniel moved to stand behind me, his reflection appearing in the glass beside mine. It would mean a new life, protection, security, never wanting for anything material again. His hand settled on my shoulders. But also restrictions. My world has rules, protocols, places you couldn't go alone, people you would have to be cautious around. A gilded cage, I murmured. At times, he admitted, surprising me with his honesty, but one I would share with you, one I would try to make as comfortable, as fulfilling as possible. I turned to face him, and if I say no, if I choose to walk away, pain flashed in his eyes, quickly masked. Then I would respect your decision, make arrangements for your safety and comfort elsewhere, and never contact you again. The finality in his voice made my chest ache. Would you hurt that man? The one who grabbed me? I asked suddenly. Daniel studied me, weighing his answer. Yes, he said finally. Not just for touching you, but for breaking the rules. In my world, actions have consequences. Would you kill him? A long pause. Do you want the comforting answer or the true one? I want the truth, I said, though part of me didn't. Always the truth, Daniel. That's my condition. If I'm going to be part of your world, I need to know what it really is. No more shadows and half-truths. He nodded slowly. Vitale crossed a line. In my world, that line is enforced with blood. I closed my eyes, absorbing this. When I opened them, Daniel was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerability, fear of my judgment. Could you live with that, Elena? He asked quietly. Could you love a man who does what I sometimes must do? The question echoed in the space between us. Could I? Could I accept not just the man who quoted poetry and danced with me under the stars, but also the one who ordered punishments and enforced his will through violence? Could I reconcile those two sides of him in my heart? I need time, I said finally. This is a lot to process. Daniel nodded, closing the ring box and setting it on the coffee table. Of course. Take all the time you need. You'll stay here tonight. For safety. Tomorrow we can discuss arrangements if you wish to. Take distance. The formality in his tone broke my heart a little. He was already pulling away, preparing himself for my rejection. I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. I'm not saying no, Daniel. I'm just asking for time to think. To be sure. Hope flickered in his eyes. Whatever you decide, Elena, know that what I feel for you is real. Perhaps the only real thing in my life. That night, I slept in one of his guest rooms, alone with my thoughts. I barely closed my eyes, turning over each possibility until dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. By morning, I knew my answer. I found Daniel in his study, already dressed in one of his impeccable suits, reading something on his laptop. He looked up when I entered, his expression carefully neutral. There's coffee in the kitchen, he offered. And Rosa made breakfast. I shook my head, moving to stand before his desk. I have conditions, I said without preamble. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. Conditions? If I'm going to marry you, if I'm going to enter your world, I need certain assurances. Something like hope kindled in his eyes, but he remained cautious. I'm listening. First, complete honesty between us. No more hiding parts of your life from me, no matter how ugly you think they are. He nodded slowly. That may be difficult at times, but yes. Second, I want to finish my degree. I dropped out to care for my mother, but I was studying social work. I want to complete that. A smile touched his lips. Done. Any university you choose. Third, I continued, my voice firming, I need to know that whatever happens with Vitale, whatever consequences your world demands, you will never enjoy it. That it will always be business, never pleasure. Daniel's expression sobered. You have my word. I take no joy in violence, Elena. It's a tool, nothing more. I took a deep breath. And finally, I need to know that you love me, not as a possession or a trophy, but as a partner, an equal in the ways that matter most. Daniel rose from his desk, coming around to stand before me. Is that really in question? He asked softly. He took my hands in his. Elena Carter, from the moment you helped a bleeding stranger in an alley, you've owned me completely. Everything I have, everything I am, is yours. Yes, I'm possessive. Yes, I'm protective. Sometimes too much so. But it's because the thought of harm coming to you, of losing you, is unbearable. He reached for the ring box that sat on his desk, opening it once more. I don't just want to possess you, cara mia. I want to cherish you, honor you, build a life with you that has room for both our worlds. He sank to one knee, holding the ring up to me. Elena Carter, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my equal in all the ways that truly matter? I looked down at this powerful, dangerous man kneeling before me, a man who commanded fear and respect throughout the city, now vulnerable and open as he waited for my answer, a man with blood on his hands and poetry in his heart. Could I love such a contradiction? Could I build a life in the spaces between darkness and light? As I reached for the ring, I realized I already had my answer. For better or worse, my fate had been sealed that rainy morning when I stopped to help a bleeding man in an alley. Yes, I said, watching as he slid the ring onto my finger. Yes, Daniel Russo, I will marry you. His smile, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face, bloomed as he rose and pulled me into his arms. As his lips found mine, sealing our future with a kiss that was both tender and possessive, I knew our path wouldn't be easy. There would be dangers, complications, moral compromises I couldn't yet imagine. But there would also be love, fierce, protective, all-consuming love that had found us in the most unlikely of circumstances. And for now, that was enough.